Today at the National Press Club, Michael Miller, the Executive Chairman of News Corp Australasia. He'll speak about the influence of big tech companies amid a changing media landscape and the need for a reset to ensure better protections for all. Michael Miller with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia. Today's Westpac address. We are meeting on the Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, Canberra. Our guest today is Michael Miller, Executive Chairman of News Corp Australasia. His topic, Australia and global tech. Time for a reset. I, by the way, am Tom Connell, Treasurer here at the Press Club and also a political anchor at Sky News. It's an understatement, of course, to say that tech and social media have transformed everything about our lives, in particular this century. From the novelty of your first ever search on Ask Jeeves, to using Google so much you consider it a verb, from agonising perhaps over that status update on MySpace to organising half of your social life, if not more, through Facebook. Young people today, of course, couldn't imagine life without social media. It's also inarguably doing them harm. Bullying through social media and sometimes tragic consequences. Addiction to phones also rampant. Separately, if you have a small business, you might live or die by the capriciousness of Facebook or perhaps the algorithm on Google. For media and media companies, social media hoovered up precious revenue via links to news sites. The News Bargaining Code in 2021 saw some of that returned. Meta, of course, pulled the plug on that, which has left media companies and the government in Australia, and indeed companies and governments around the world, scrambling for a solution. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation on X, where our handle is @PressClubAust. You can also use the hashtag NPC. Please welcome Michael Miller to the podium.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to the Press Club for hosting me here today. I too would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on and recognise them and others with a connection to the lands of the ACT. Between 2022 and 2023, the Department of Home Affairs processed over 8 million visas for people wishing to come to Australia. To be approved, each applicant had to sign and agree to the Australian Values Statement, a list of shared values that ensure Australians and visitors look out for each other and collectively strive for the national common good. These values reflect the pillars of Australian society and the principles that enshrine the way we treat each other. It's a way of protecting our social cohesion and safeguards against criminal and illegal behaviour. And companies wanting to do business here also have to meet our standards and sign up to our rules, laws and expectations. But the global tech monopolies that have changed our lives and our nation choose not to meet those standards. They refuse to play by our rules. These tech giants, especially the social media networks such as Meta, TikTok and X, operate outside our legal system. We know the collective damage they cause to our young and elderly, businesses, big and small, to our democracy and to our economy. How long is Australia going to allow them to operate as protected species? It's been long enough, and this address is about what we can do about it. It's time. Before we look at the now, let's go back to the internet's wonder years. In the space of just one generation, we've gone from the magic that Tom talked about to madness. Remember when we first discovered search and when we learned we could find anything we wanted to know at the click of a button? Remember when our phones became smart, when we started sharing photographs and memories with joy and delight? Remember our first video calls with family we hadn't seen for years, when we first bought something online? That was before the online scams and blackmail, before cyberbullying and revenge porn, before doxing and trolling, deep fakes, conspiracies, the surveillance economy and political interference, before terrorists live-streamed massacres and sites celebrated anorexia as a glamorous lifestyle. before the epidemic of loneliness and anxiety, and before the algorithms turned us into addicts. The wonder years seem a very long time ago. Less than 1 year ago, a 45-year-old man used an explicit photo of his own teenage niece on Meta's Instagram to blackmail 16-year-old Mac Holdsworth. After being caught up in an evil online sexual extortion, Mac took his own life. And because of that, a family in Australia lost a respectful, cheeky, challenging, beautiful young man. They are the words of Mac's father, Wayne, who I'd like to acknowledge is here today. Wayne. It's impossible to understand your sorrow, but you and parents like you around Australia are driven to fight back, and that courage is inspiring. To the other parents here today who came to Canberra yesterday to meet with parliamentarians, I also thank you, Jane, Harley, Emma and Fiona. I'm struck by your courage and determination to see things change. The leading cause of death among Australians aged 15 to 24 is suicide. Mental health disorders among young people have soared by nearly 50% in 15 years. The problem started exploding as young people became addicted to social media. The blue thumbs up has a lot to answer for. But in January, Facebook creator Mark Zuckerberg told a congressional hearing in Washington that the existing body of scientific work has not shown a causal link between using social media and young people having worse mental health. Government statisticians and mental health experts, and especially the parents of children we have lost, know otherwise. Recent research in Australia asked 3,000 social media users about their digital lives and attitudes. 7 out of every 10 said they or someone they know had first-hand experience of negative issues on social media. For teenagers, the number is even higher, and the range of harms they talk about is even longer than those I listed a few moments ago. There is no doubt our children are paying the price, but Mark Zuckerberg denies there's even a problem. Last week, I was speaking to Andrew Forrest to learn more about his campaign to stop Meta from allowing his image to be used in scam advertisements that are stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from vulnerable Australians. We've all seen those ads that hijack the faces of celebrities and respected business leaders and trick people into sending their life savings to criminals. At the height of his use of his image, up to 7 different ads pretending to be Andrew were being generated every day. He has fought for years to get Meta to stop them, but they won't. The online scam business is exploding. The Australian recently reported of the scandemic and the rise of scam factories in Southeast Asia. Some scam factories are as big as university campuses. One in the Philippines is made up of more than 30 buildings, and national economies are now being shaped by this new criminal industry. The National Anti-Scam Centre reports that Australians lost $2.7 billion to scams last year. Globally, cyber scamming is now said to represent the world's 3rd largest economy behind the US and China. The list of what's going wrong just keeps getting longer. Misinformation and disinformation, designed to cause real harm, is leading people down dangerous algorithmic rabbit holes. Addiction and doom scrolling are now parts of our lives, and we say things to people online we wouldn't dare to say to them face to face. Misogyny among young men is appallingly rife. 65% of Australian girls and young women report being harassed or abused by boys online. Almost all our elite female athletes have been subject to body shaming and trolling. West Australian newspapers reported in March about the explosion in online sexual exploitation, with 32 million reports on major platforms each year. This is just the tip of a very large iceberg. In the words of Cybersecurity Minister Claire O'Neil, just about every problem that we have as a country is either being exacerbated by or caused by social media. And we're not seeing a skerrick of responsibility taken by these companies. And why is this happening? Because on social media, bad behaviour is good for business. The social media giants, they profit from evil videos. They profit from bullying. They profit from online con artists. They profit from glamorising eating disorders. In the words of a British father who, like Wayne, lost their child to suicide, they monetise misery. In Meta's case, according to a recent report in the UK's Sunday Times magazine, that profit is a staggering $136 million US every single day. It's understandable that we focus on the content that is causing the harm, but the other truly damaging aspect of all this is the partnership between the content and the conduct of the businesses that distribute it. The content and the conduct are partners in crime. We know this is the case from Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen. She says that Facebook knew its algorithms were damaging teenagers' mental health. It knew that posts instigated ethnic violence in countries like Ethiopia, and it failed to curb misinformation before the Capitol Hill riots on January 6. Around the world, people are demanding that the days of the digital Wild West have to stop. The algorithms and those that operate them in total secrecy are the biggest villains. It's time we made them accountable. Australia was one of the first countries to be disrupted by the online revolution, and media was one of the first industries. Australian companies like car sales and realestate.com were among the first in the world to break out from print channels and onto the internet. News companies pushed into the digital space. We took on the challenge. We innovated. With Meta's decision to walk away from its deals to pay Australian news companies for their content, our industry is in new territory once again. Media may be a business, but remember, journalism is vital to democracy. It ensures that citizens are informed, engaged, and capable of holding their leaders to account. Without a local news media, transparency, accountability, and public participation, the founding principles of democracy are significantly weakened. The ACCC has ruled that for media companies, Meta is an unavoidable trading partner. And in 2021, Parliament determined that Meta should pay for the news it uses. We had a deal, they walked away. I believe they have an obligation to renew the agreements and honour our laws. It is intriguing that Meta has no problem turning off the news, but has a big problem turning off teenage fight clubs, the bullying of young women, or scam advertising. Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones captured the situation when he says that Meta is for criminals and against journalism. After Meta had turned off the news in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau commented that Meta were prioritising profit over safety as devastating wildfires forced tens of thousands to evacuate their homes. Faced with that scenario playing out in Australia, we cannot let ourselves be bullied. Meta must be designated under the Media Bargaining Code and challenged to negotiate in good faith. News media is the canary in the coal mine, and the current battle in my industry is part of a much larger struggle, a struggle that will encompass and impact more industries and more people. As a nation, we must not blink now. Commonwealth Bank CEO Matt Coleman told the Australian Financial Review in March, "The world has never seen global monopolies of the size and scale of today's big tech companies. These companies have immense power, and it is critical that they do not undermine Australian sovereignty. Matt told me later that it's reasonable to expect that all companies benefiting from Australians should rightly contribute to a more prosperous Australia. He said that big tech should not free ride on other Australian industries, leaving the cost, investment and regulatory obligations to local companies. No company should be too big to regulate. Let's pause here and go back in time to those early wonder years of the internet and imagine for a moment we had a crystal ball. If we could have looked into the future and seen a world where a handful of companies had privatised the internet, created multi-billion-dollar advertising monopolies and exposed billions of people to harmful content while turning their noses up at nations around the world, would we have been okay with that? Even before nations like Australia could answer that question, America had already given the tech industry the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. It gave tech companies a blanket exemption from responsibility under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. This created a Silicon Valley sovereignty that now lets them get away with anything. And it's no care and no responsibility, and it's created a global crisis. In the early days of the digital revolution, US lawmakers created a permissive environment for their innovators to flourish. But that was before these startups grew up. Now that they have become some of the most profitable and impactful companies the world has ever seen, even American regulators and politicians know that time is up. Recently, politicians from across the political divide jointly wrote in the Wall Street Journal saying Section 230 is now poisoning the healthy online ecosystem it once fostered. Big tech companies are exploiting the law to shield themselves from responsibility or accountability. They concluded Congress's failure to revisit this law is irresponsible and untenable. So, what can Australia do about these tech giants? Fines don't work. Meta has been a frequent target of regulators. In the last 2 years, numerous penalties have been levelled against Meta for breaking EU data and privacy laws. In May last year, Meta was fined €1.2 billion by the Irish Data Protection Commission for putting the data of EU citizens at risk. As of last week, there are at least 30 enforcement actions against Meta around the globe. But when does this money get paid? Their usual pattern is to fight any ruling against them through appeals in the courts for years. The tech monopolies love to use the law to protect their right to be above the law. When the threat of regulation comes in their direction, the tech monopoly has a playbook. They declare that they want to be regulated, but no solution is ever workable for them. Then they insist that regulation should be harmonised across jurisdictions. And that tactic is playing out again now. Meta argues that since digital platforms are global, regulation should be global and not country-specific. And it knows that such a global agreement is never going to happen. What it is really saying is that the US get-out-of-jail-free card should apply globally. So why should sovereign nations with their own cultures and identities to protect agree that America's rules should apply to them? As nations like Australia and individuals like Andrew Forrest wage legal fights against the tech monopolies, it may end up that the case for change will be proved by losing in court rather than by winning. In the recent case about a Sydney bishop being stabbed on video, the Australian government lost its attempt to have the video taken down across the globe. While X eventually voluntarily took it down in Australia, if they hadn't, Elon Musk would have done as Meta has done. He would have argued that his company doesn't actually operate in Australia. Another way to say, your rules don't apply to us. Faced with this exact situation, Andrew Forrest has taken his legal fight to the place Meta does run its business from, the United States. I suspect he will lose there as well, because in the United States, Meta will argue that on its home turf, it's protected by its Section 230 shield. So if you're a Silicon Valley sovereign, courts outside the US can't touch you, and inside the US, you're a protected species. The proof of how important this is to the tech monopolies is seen in the way they repeatedly try to insert language that enshrines their American protection into trade agreements with other countries. In his response to X's fight to keep the stabbing video on its platform, Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones said, "We don't think the rules of the jungle should apply on social media platforms. We think the rules of a civil society should apply there. Just because they're operated internationally doesn't mean they shouldn't be abiding by Australian law." The establishment of the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee into the influence and impacts of Meta, TikTok and X on Australian society provides a forum where all these issues can be aired, from the community harms to the commercial threats. It's time to stop asking for change and start demanding change. On behalf of 27 million Australians, the Australian government has the mandate and the ability to re-establish and reassert itself as the representatives and rule makers of Australia by resetting the rules for global platforms' access to Australians. It's time for them to play by our rules. Communications Minister Michelle Rowland recently described the situation like this. We're up against these giant companies, multinationals who have more power, money and global influence than some standalone nations. They have deep pockets. They are highly litigious, but that is no reason why they should not be subject to Australian law, and we should seek to enforce Australian law. I couldn't agree more. The words social licence describe the permission companies have to operate within a society. The tech monopolies should also be made to pay a licence. This social licence would be a package of laws and requirements the tech monopolies would need to meet if they want access to Australian consumers. Under this licence, the Australian government would be able to make platforms liable for all the content that is amplified, curated and controlled by their algorithms or recommender engines, now hiding behind Section 230 in Australia. The licence should require that each platform has an effective consumer complaints handling system, including call centres contactable by telephone with expert staff in Australia. Other measures to be included: the ex-ante competition framework set out by the ACCC, which would address the problem of the monopolised digital advertising markets. A contribution to the money we are spending tackling mental health problems. A requirement for the tech platforms proven to be media's unavoidable trading partners would be to honour the media bargaining code and compensate all publishers and media companies. Penalties should also be included. Penalties that incorporate criminal sanctions for companies and their executives that agree to the licence but then break the rules. And the power to ultimately block access to our country and our people if they refuse to play by our rules. This idea of a social licence is neither overreach nor pie in the sky. Let's go back to a real-world example. A company may want to come to Australia to mine the mineral of the moment, copper. We rightly regard copper as Australian property, and if you want to extract it, here are just a few of the things that Australia requires. You will pay a royalty on the copper to access the copper. You will fairly negotiate with the landowners. You will hire Australians and meet all our industrial relations standards, safety requirements and awards. You will meet all environmental requirements and you will pay to fix any damage you cause or face penalties. In my view, the tech monopolies are also mining companies. But they don't mine our minerals, they mine our lives. And those lives are Australia's greatest resource. And we have a responsibility to protect ourselves and the way we want to live. If a company wants the right to access every part of our lives so they can profit from our habits and choices, so it can sell us the goods and its machine thinks we want, so it can take on our existing industries and business practices, then there's a price to pay for that access. Penalties to pay for any damage caused. While some may be shocked by this list of requirements, no business leader here would be surprised. Every bank and telco has to meet the standards of complaints handling set out by the law. Every media company is required by law to accept total responsibility for everything it publishes. No advertising business can run fake ads using the identities of Australia's most well-known people. And no other business can scoop up its competitors and totally dominate a marketplace. In short, all businesses accessing Australian people play by these rules, except the tech monopolies. It's time that changed. It's time for a level playing field. What choices would the social media giants face if Australia did impose this social licence? They could sign up or not, their choice. And if Meta or TikTok or X walked away, my response would be, it won't be the end of the world. We all know that innovation occurs in the digital space, and the tech monopolies know how quickly this void would be filled. The wonder years are over. Australians are no longer in awe of social media. 75% are very or extremely concerned about frauds and scams. 83% believe that the tech monopolies should be subject to Australian regulations and laws. Australians overwhelmingly say that social media should play by the same rules as the rest of us. I've talked about social and legal issues that relate to these tech giants, but at its core is the issue of human rights. We all have a right to feel safe and respected. Online violence, harassment and bullying are human rights issues that profoundly affect the lives of Australians. When scammers steal $2.7 billion a year from vulnerable Australians, the loss is felt through the healthcare system, through social welfare, and in additional pensions paid to people who have lost everything. Have no doubt, we will be paying the social and economic cost of this social media crisis for decades. It's time to reset our digital environment to protect vulnerable people rather than prey on them. It's time for a reset to protect the next generation of children like Mac. It's time to protect our parents and our national identity. It's time for the tech monopolies to play by Australia's rules. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Michael. Plenty to get through there. I suppose when you talk about that solution coming initially from the Australian government around legislation, and you said at the end, if the tech companies effectively walk away, the world doesn't end. Governments tend to do things, though, only if they have a general amount of support in the community. So does that mean it's actually back on whether the Australian people go beyond the figures you quoted, beyond being concerned, and get to the point of going, you know what, I'm happy to have no Facebook in my life, or Twitter, or TikTok, or whatever it might be, that they'd accept that outcome? Is that perhaps partly what's holding back the Australian government from more drastic action?
No, I don't believe the Australian government is holding back. If you go back to the News Media Bargaining Code, which 3 years ago feels like a long time ago now, but that had support of the Greens, Labor, Liberal. It was seen to be an important step in that right direction. There are other countries around the world where they have turned off social media. It's happened in India, and what we saw in India was that local innovators met that void. And in fact, for Australian businesses, or for Indian businesses and for Indian consumers, it was actually made for their market, with language changes and other local nuances, which were far better actually for the country, but it was locally grown and locally purposed. And that's what would happen here, I've got no doubt.
Could you have that happen beforehand? Go, here's another option. This is why you can turn them off. I mean,
Well,
maybe
there's
don't
no
give
entry.
any company secrets away, but
We talk about the addiction and the unavoidable trading partner that the ACCC described. It is difficult for people to, there's no motivation for them to change at the moment, because that's where they're connected to, and the figure is that 92% of Australians use a meta platform each month, and that is something which is a very large share of that social media market.
question from Anna Henderson.
Thank you. Anna Henderson, SBS World News. In the Voice to Parliament referendum, independent work was conducted by academics that identified what it determined was misinformation about the nature of the referendum that was published by News Corp outlets. So in an era of increasing misinformation, we've heard from the EU just in the last couple of days, they're dealing with the same thing there. What is News Corp's commitment to fact-checking and accuracy? And if there is something that's found to be wrong, what's the internal process for holding staff accountable?
Yeah. So we are subject to Australian laws, and we're subject to defamation. We're members of the Press Council. We put ourselves out there to be. There's plenty of comment. I've heard some today myself. About News Corp, and that it's important that various ideas are surfaced across all media, and that includes News Corp. In terms of internal processes, you ask about fact-checking. Yep, we have very diligent legal and subbing processes in place to check what we write. I understand that we don't always, what is written, what is produced is of the liked by all, but that is part of what our democracy is. Ensuring that various views are surfaced.
It might not be liked by all, but just for example, Andrew Bolt said it would claim an Aboriginal-only parliament, and Peter Credlin said it was about treaty and compensation. So did they get it wrong?
They are commentators, and not taking them out of their opinion context. I think we've got to understand the difference between news reporting and opinion and commentary, and that I'd say that Andrew is definitely a commentator, and that his views are part of the News Corp group, but not the only view.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Rosie Lewis from The Australian.
Just quickly, as someone who reported on The Voice for The Australian, I'll stand by our news reporting, but that's up to everyone else to be the judge of. Just to tease out this proposal that you've presented, I think for the first time today, have you spoken to other media chiefs about the package, this idea of a social licence? Are any of them on board? And I note there's at least one senator in the room who may be listening closely. Is there any political support from this at this stage, from the government, from the opposition or from the Greens?
I've gone into a little more detail today, and I think you read in the Fin Review today. Another voice, not dissimilar to the thoughts around a social licence. I suppose as an industry we haven't met on this, but as an industry we are all concerned about the impact of the tech platforms, and that the unlevel playing field that Australian businesses and Australian media are having in terms of the government. Definitely the parliamentary joint committee, I see it has identified that there is an issue, and that that's an issue that part of this I would want to have considered. But the longer we leave this, the greater the impact. And this is something which is these are issues that are gaining momentum that need to be stopped. So to answer your question, we have not made a proposal to government, but today is a concept which I hope that Parliament takes seriously.
We had, obviously, the Australian Government Act in 2021. It was seen as sort of world leading. Is it fair to say where Facebook's gone since, or Meta has gone since then, it's a sort of ramping up of actions, the current day government would have to go a fair bit further? And I don't see a licence, a social licence, replacing the News Media Bargaining Code. I would see it enshrining the News Media Bargaining Code as just one of the aspects of the broader licence that we should be considering with a range of laws. Monty Boville.
Monty Bovril from the ABC. Thank you for your address today. The ABC's managing director was asked last week if News Corp was obsessed with the ABC, to which he responded, yes, they are. My question to you is, do you think the level of News Corp's reporting on the ABC is justified? And supplementary to that, do you think media companies like News Corp and the ABC should be working more together to combat some of the issues and challenges you've talked about today?
Yep, a few questions in there. Okay, on any single day of the week, there's a small group of the ABC that will review and critique News Corp and other media, not just News Corp. And at the News Corp, there's a small cluster that will review and critique other media and not just the ABC. As I referenced, I got a bit of critiquing of my own this morning on the ABC, but I do feel that we're not obsessed. I think that's. We look at Media Watch every Monday. We accept that that's part of having varied media and giving Australians choice. So I think if we just look at one aspect of the ABC, you get a pretty narrow vision. I look more broadly than that, and that I don't think either organisation. I disagree with David. I don't think either organisation are obsessed as what may get amplified within the industry. And to your question, should we be working together? Australia's Right to Know is a platform that all media companies work together on to ensure Australians' right to know is protected. And there's a lot more we could be doing in that area. And what I've talked about today is an industry issue. It's not a News Corp issue. It's an Australian issue. It's an Australian business issue. And that's why a licence would encompass far more than just media.
Next question from Olivia Ireland.
Thank you for your speech. Olivia Ireland from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Ms Miller, a year ago, News Corp was giving warnings about the use of artificial intelligence and its effects on the media, and now you're doing deals. What exactly has changed? And when it comes to editorial redundancies, what will the scale of redundancies be at News Corp, and how many Australian journalists will lose their jobs?
Yeah. I'll answer your second question first. I've never talked about numbers, and the speculation of numbers out there is incorrect. In terms of journalists, we will always try to minimise frontline journalists. Those are on the ground, and that unfortunately, we are going through, as an industry, a lot of change, and we're looking to right-size the period into this advertising downturn to be in a position for growth coming out. So I'm not going to talk to numbers and never have, and don't plan to either. Your first question again was?
The first question was...
AI.
Yes.
Yeah. AI, generative AI, has not been in the vernacular for long. I think what has changed over the past year is that a lot of those AI companies have learned from the tech platforms to engage with media earlier. And that's what I think all media companies are seeing, that they are wanting to have conversations around how they see media as being important partners, and that I think that media companies should be open to having those conversations in what those partnerships and what that there's no doubt that those AI companies need media companies, and that if the partnership is right, then I don't think media companies should be closed-minded to working with AI companies either.
Obviously, starting with the assumption that anchors, are totally irreplaceable. But when you're talking about this type of technology, often the concept is more basic jobs can be replaced, but it allows, more advanced or analysis or whatever it might be. Is that the principle on AI?
In the newsrooms, for the AI companies, we have not just great archives and great currency, but also an understanding of language, and so that's what their models have yet to fully develop. I think as media companies using AI, it's a tool. You're right, Tom. We're not going to see journalists replaced by AI, but if it allows us to do a better job, we mentioned fact checking. It talks about speed to publish with greater accuracy. Then they're the areas that I feel that definitely in the areas of research. I think as journalists, be doing a better job by using the technology available to us, and AI is just one of those technologies.
Josh Butler from Guardian Australia.
G'day, Josh.
Hi, thanks for your speech. Josh Butler from The Guardian. I hope to ask you about News Corp's Let Them Be Kids campaign. News Corp is calling for the government to legislate for the age of social media access to go from 13 to 16. I'd like to ask how you think that should or could work. A number of privacy and tech experts have said that the technology doesn't really exist at the moment, or that it will be quite difficult to do it without, for instance, handing over more of your personal details to either the government or social media platforms. And I guess additionally, if it came to it, would you be happy to hand over more of your personal documents to, for instance?
Yeah, I'm not sure that you need to pass over technical documents. I think both face and identity checking that you are 16 or older, it's referencing what's happened in the past 48 hours in New York, where that state is wanting to introduce legislation so that restricts social media usage to 16, and that the tech platforms will have to change their algorithms to not target under 16-year-olds. And so I think we're protecting the kids. I don't know that we're necessarily in the best position to work through the technology, but there's no way we're suggesting the handing over of more privacy data. We know that the tech platforms can turn things off and turn things down and target when they wish. And that's what we're proposing here, that we've got to keep our kids safe, and that the tech platforms have got to take more responsibility, and they won't do that unless they're legislated to, and that's what we're encouraging the Australian government to do.
Next question comes from Dana Daniel.
Thank you for your speech. Dana Daniel from the Canberra Times. You've said that media companies shouldn't be closed-minded about generative AI. Like News Corp, the public broadcasters ABC and SBS have started to experiment with AI, and it's likely they will eventually use it to generate news stories, which News Corp is already doing. Given that traditional media companies are dealing with declining advertising revenues, do you have any concerns about the public broadcasters going down this route, which would enable them to publish more and more news online for free? And an additional question, are you concerned about Meta AI's function that purports to summarise paywalled news articles, including from News Corp, but actually serves up disinformation and inaccuracies?
I'll leave the last comment alone. In regards to concerns by Meta and other companies taking paywall data onto their platforms, that concerns me greatly. They should be paying a licence, and they should be paying a fee, and that was what the News Media Bargaining Code was intended. If they want to use the content and profit from the work of others, they should pay the people who create that. You asked a question about the public broadcasters. Every media company should be using technology to do the best job possible. And the technology is changing, and that I don't see the public broadcasters being any different in that space to any other commercial organisation.
Just with the paywall issue, it's actually just filling in the blanks, and it's saying that it's making a summary, but it's actually just making things up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have seen some of that. And at the moment, we go down the path of the Australian government and Andrew Forrest in trying to get them to change that. And that's a long road. It's an expensive road. But we don't have the laws in place in Australia to ensure that we can get those, any misinformation corrected. The journalists in the room are subject to laws, as media companies are, and so should they.
You must think sometimes tech companies are making it easy. With Google, they had what AI was telling people how many rocks a day they could eat, and I think there was bizarre advice around limit it to 4 to 5 cigarettes per day for pregnant women. You must just think, why they're making it so easy. They put stuff out here. I mean, they'd have so much money to test this stuff, how they could not, have better checks and balances.
Yeah. As I mentioned, their algorithms are there to get people to go down these rabbit holes, which are rabbit holes that people, unfortunately, form other health issues, social issues, and we've talked about eating disorders and others, and it's a slope, and I think we've experienced that.
Next question from Chris Yeoman.
Mr. Miller, Chris Yeoman, Sky News and the Australian contributor. The one government that can do something about these big tech companies and has the power to do it is the United States. Do you think the Australian Prime Minister should be raising his voice to say that this is not just a social concern, it's a national security concern? and that the United States should use the powers that it has to break up these big tech companies?
I think he's got the perfect entree now that there's a coalition of senators in the US that are raising this. So it's an issue in the US. It's an issue in every country, to be frank, and it's an issue in Australia. I think an important thing for us to just reflect upon is that Australia was one of the first countries impacted by the internet. A lot of our tech companies started before they started in the US. We were disrupted faster than others. Why is that? We're the second fastest in the world for early adoption, and we have a high propensity to pay for technology. And that therefore the impact that we're seeing from the tech platforms are happening here first, not in other countries. So that's why we have to continue. The News Media Bargaining Code led. Australia has to continue to lead in addressing these issues. We can't fall into the trap where we're now following others. Following the US, I think, to answer your question, I think this is, our parliamentarians should raise it with other parliamentarians. I know none of them are, but I think if the Prime Minister has that opportunity, he should take it.
Kat Wong from AAP.
Thank you for your address today. I'm Kat Wong from AAP. So you've talked a lot today about how 65% of women and girls have reported being harassed online, how the impact of mental health caused by online social media platforms, and how a lot of them profit from bullying. But I will note that a lot of News Corp reportage has caused women to be bullied. We have Yasmin Abdel-Magid famously left the country after a lot of controversy around some of her comments. Antoinette Lattouf has also been at the centre of a lot of harassment because of reportage as well. Brittany Higgins, and also in 2021, there was a report which found that 45 of News Corp's articles about transgender kids had caused substantial distress among those communities. Was it okay for News Corp's work to bully these different demographics and these different people?
The work wasn't intended to bully. They raised issues. I'd also point you to the substantial body of work and campaigns our mastheads have run to stop bullying, and that that has been is currently running along the lines of the Let Them Be Kids campaign to raise the age. Can We Talk, a campaign run by the Sunday Telegraph, which asked for a counsellor in every single school, which then the New South Wales government did make that change for. So I'd actually stand by a lot of our journalism and the positive impact it has on the advocacy that we undertake.
But a lot of these have also, a lot of social media companies probably argue that they don't intend to bully either. A lot of them have also poured money into mental health campaigns. Would you not say that that is a similar situation?
I differ greatly. The way they behave and the little care they have for the country, the little they give back, the fact they don't play by Australian rules, they don't subscribe to Australian values is quite different.
Jack Quayle is up next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Jack Quayle from the News Corp Newswire. As you've pointed to in an address, we've seen social media platforms around the world evade attempts by the Australian government as well as other countries for regulation attempts, rather. Does getting platforms to play by the rules require a coalition of like-minded countries, I guess, to bring platforms to the negotiating table? I mean, you said this is a similar issue in many countries, or do you think Australia can go it alone?
I think Australia has to go alone. I don't think we can wait for other countries. We've gone alone before and it's been effective. The News Media Bargaining Code got the tech platforms to the table. We have a partnership with Google, as many media companies in the room do have. And that in this case, there's Meta who is now finding a way. We've seen their playbook play out in Canada, and that is not going to end well there. And I mentioned Justin Trudeau there as well. So no, I don't feel that Australia needs to wait and have a coalition. That will take time and the impacts will continue to mount the longer we take.
What can you tell us about the appetite at the moment within Australian politics to go it alone, which is it's a bold move, no doubt?
I'm not seeing any pushback in the past of going alone. The reviews and the committees can take time, and I think that they will surface good ideas, and that's important. That it's just not this form of a social licence, but there are other options there we need to surface. I think the government is listening. I think they've made a lot of public comments of their concerns, but we've got to stop making comments. We've got to act, and that's what I'm calling on today.
So you think it might be figuring out a way to do it that has support from voters, businesses, anyone affected, but the appetite hasn't shifted?
Now, I think there is an appetite there. I think it's complex, but I'm trying to today bring it together as not just protecting Australians, but also Australian businesses, and essentially Australian values, and they're the human rights I talk to.
Cam Redden.
Mr Miller, Cameron Redden, Sky News. You mentioned there turning comments into action, also touching on that theme of fighting the fight, even if it means you're going to lose legally. Would you like to see more explicit, simple language from the government to say, if you don't comply, we will seek to ban you. Even if we can't ban you, we will try?
Well, I think the strong language would help, but I think the government and ourselves know the playbook now, that they'll sit down and, as I said, they'll say we will participate in regulation, but that just pushes it out. And so I don't think we can have, I think asking them won't get the result. I think we've got to demand it, and we've got to put some teeth behind those demands.
Thank you.
Danielle Said from Crikey.
Mr Miller, Danielle Said from Crikey. You've spoken at some length today about the social licence that big media companies operating in our media market must have. News Corp paid no tax in Australia, according to the ATO's last tax transparency report, despite making over $1.4 billion in profits in 2023. Is this the model of a company that operates with a social licence?
We have no issues with the tax department. We resolved any disputes a number of years ago, and we've had no adverse findings since.
And just on that social licence, you spoke about monopolies. In 2020, News Corp controlled 59% of the country's metropolitan and national print media markets. How do you view the degree of concentration in our media market and your company's role in it?
Australians have never had more choice for media. We've seen the Daily Mail, The Guardian, the New York Times has a large bureau here. The number of streaming options that Australians have from offshore has never been greater. We subject ourselves to the ACCC as every company should. And so we are meeting our obligations, and that media choice, as I said, has never been greater, so we don't have a monopoly on news.
Nick Stewart from Ability News.
Olivia asked you about your deal with the AI companies, and you assured us that actually you've got that all covered and this will work positively. You said more or less the same about the deal that you had with Meta and the other social media companies a couple of years ago. Why do you think that this time it's different? Why do you think that you'll be able to control this and actually use it as a good cooperative venture to create better news?
I think we've learned a lot over the past 3 years about the partnerships we've had, and we've still got partnerships in place with other tech platforms, which are very different to that, to the decision that Meta have now made. I think that there are other media companies in the room who are also partners with Google in this case. We've learned how so ultimately it's audiences or clients that need to benefit from these agreements, and that additionally we're far better understanding of the technology involved. So we go into agreements with our eyes open, but I'd say that coming together with common thinking, as we have in this case, is a positive step, and one which, as I said previously, the AI companies have learnt of the path of the tech platforms not to follow.
So you're not worried that Google and other companies like that will eventually become the repositories of knowledge, which should be media and information companies?
They're already there, I suspect.
Is there an element if you can't beat them, join them?
No, you'll be partners in these. I wouldn't say. Some days, I think in all business now, you may sit opposite people, and some days you may sit next to them. And that the world has changed a lot, and that you need to be thinking about not traditional business dynamics. You need to be thinking forward, and that's what I think the AI companies are also asking.
Anna Henderson.
Back again. At SBS, we do speak to a lot of new migrants who have arrived in Australia and who open the front page of their paper in places like Sydney to see headlines like, "Hey Albo, shut the door," 100 people a week, Sydney Mayor's blast, shocking migration figures. And the feedback they give is that they don't feel welcome in this country, and they feel that the approach, from their perspective, is racist. What do you say to that perception?
Migration is definitely the theme of the moment. When I think of Australia, we're a very accepting country, and that in any particular news bulletin you can find an exception, and you can find an exception on a page across the many papers that we publish across the year. And so while I understand that some people may take exception to one news story, there's also a lot of news stories which they would agree with. And that is a part of that contest of ideas and that spread of thinking. I would want to protect our Australian values and our Australian acceptance of new cultures. And that's what's made us, I think, now the most multicultural country in the world, and particularly Sydney. And that I can understand that there are some who are going to take exception to different headlines at different times. But that's not the intent. It's about the intent of making sure Australia is a better place, a safer place, a fairer place for all.
I think their underlying point is about social cohesion. Do you see News Corp as having a role in promoting social cohesion?
Yeah, I'm proud of the advocacy work we undertake, the campaigns we run, and the various discussions which some others aren't prepared to necessarily raise. So I understand that in debate there are some uncomfortable places that you go, but I'm a great believer that you got to surface those polls at some point to arrive at a place which is socially acceptable, and that is ensuring that there are various views and various voices being surfaced.
Thank you.
Follow up from Rosie Lewis from The Australian.
On the media bargaining code, if the government doesn't designate Meta and force it to renegotiate, will the code have failed? And doesn't Meta walking away from the deal show that it's not afraid of any laws, including the proposal you're putting forward today?
They've shown around the world they're not afraid of any laws, and that's why I'm putting forward a proposal which is a package of new laws which puts them in the position that they either pay a licence or we don't want them here.
So has the code failed today?
No, I don't believe the code failed. I think the code got them to the table, and that was important. And that there are still people who participated in the code who are very different. They are contributing. They're contributing to the industry, but also contributing more to Australia and taking greater responsibility. So I wouldn't want to see that Meta's single decision is a total reflection of the code. I think we've also learnt a lot from the code, and that's why I'd see the code evolving and should be enshrined in a social licence.
And when you say, look, they don't want to sign up to that, good riddance, do you feel as though the government is willing to go that far?
They should. It's a question you can ask them.
We do sometimes.
You do.
Dana Daniel's up next.
Thank you. Dana Daniel from the Canberra Times again. You've said that it won't be a big deal if Meta leaves Australia and that we can just come up with other social media platforms to fill in the blank, to fill in that space. But Australia is not really a tech superpower. Do you see this as something that government should fund and subsidise an alternative social media industry in Australia?
First of all, Meta leaving the country. The E-Safety Commissioner said that there were 32 million reports of child exploitation online last year. 85% of those came from the 4 Meta platforms: Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook and Threads. They are by far the worst actor. 32 million. Good riddance. If you don't want to not just sign up to our values, but sign up to our laws, why do we want them here?
But in terms of the Australian public and consumers being on board with that, you have mentioned that an alternative platform would be how they would... Yeah.
It's happened in other markets. I think Australians are innovators. We do have great, and again I reflect that our tech platform, our tech marketplaces here, and I mentioned car sales and REA, they launched before their US competitors. This was one of the first countries to be disrupted. That's why we have to lead in this space, because the damage is being done here before it's being seen elsewhere.
So we don't need subsidies then?
I'm not here to ask for subsidies. I'm asking for the government to move quickly with a social licence that enshrines our way of life, that protects Australian businesses, not just protects Australian business, puts us a level playing field. We're not even asking for protection, we're looking for a level playing field. Have them play by our laws, and if not, put penalties in place. That's what other businesses have to sign up to. That's what they should sign up to.
Sure, Josh, you got my attention. Go for it.
Thank you. Just a quick one more. Josh Butler from The Guardian. You've just, to follow up on those last couple of questions, you said good riddance. Many News Corp publications have accounts on all those platforms that you've mentioned, Facebook, Threads, Instagram, what have you. Would there be any move to either leaving those platforms, to an edict to cancel your accounts on those, or more broadly, what would be the impact on News Corp if those meta platforms were to disappear from Australia tomorrow?
No, I think that they would be replaced. But to answer your question about the accounts we have on those platforms, the ACCC found that they were an unavoidable trading partner. And in meetings I've had with politicians, they understand the damage that the platforms are being caused, but they themselves can't exit those platforms because that's where their voters are, their local communities are. They're unavoidably to use, and that's why they do operate here, because they are so pervasive.
Thanks.
I guess anyone that grew up with a relative normal childhood without social media, it's easier to convince them of the ills. For people that didn't, this is all they know. Is that going to be more of a challenge? They're part of this cohort votes, they're growing in number, they're going to say, well, I know you say it's terrible, but I like it, I can't live without it.
Yeah, well, we need to do a better job explaining the impact it's having. I would say that, go back to the stats, that 65% of Australian girls and young women have been subject to the bullying and harassment online. I think people have experienced the scams, the different messaging that we get, the poor behaviour that isn't being checked. They're seeing the fake ads. I think we're going to need to do a better job of reminding the negative impacts far outweigh the little benefits we're now getting from it.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please thank Michael Miller? Accept our gift. Membership to the club. Welcome back anytime as well.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.